Hash House and Circle Up.
Welcome to On, the Hash House Harrier podcast for interviews, history, and stories. I'm your host, Ra.
Today on the podcast, we're back in Florida with somebody who's gone East Coast, out to the Pacific, lots of other places in between. Now enjoying the retired hashing life and in a new location, so things may have changed by the time you hear this podcast. Welcome today on the podcast, Tooth Fairy.
Thank you, Rob. Great to see you.
All right, let's tell everybody your hashing origin story. When, where, and how did you get to your first hash?
I was always an avid runner, ran in college, Division I. I was in the Navy for 30 years as an officer. One of my early duty stations, I was running a race on base, 5K. And after the race, a guy came up to me and said, "Hey, you want to do a run next weekend? It's a fun kind of run." He explained some of what it was. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll try it." And it was the Samurai hash in Tokyo. That particular week was held in Yokohama. They normally run on Saturdays, but it was a night hash. And so here I was running around the city of Yokohama at night through all these streets, following all these markings. We finished at this place called the Nagishi Club, which was an old Navy housing area that doesn't exist anymore. And I thought, this is a lot of fun. I'm going to keep coming back. I went back the next week. I hashed the next week, and then a bunch of the hashers said, "Hey, come on up to Tokyo with us tonight." I wasn't really prepared to, but I went up and we partied I went all over Tokyo, and I crashed at somebody's house. And I said, "This is a lot of fun. It's all the things I like to do, running, having a few beers, socializing with people. This is great." So I kept doing it.
Who brought you and when was that?
Dan Sherrard was the summer of '93. I'd only been in Japan for 1 month at the time. And so it didn't take long being overseas in the military as a runner to get introduced to the hash.
Let me ask you then what it was like. What do you remember from the first hash? Things like, was it all men? Did you pay? What was the beer like? In 1993, what the public think? You were running through public spaces. What about all that?
But the Samurai hash, I really liked the mix of people. We had about half Japanese nationals. We had a whole bunch of expats living in and around the Tokyo area, and we had military. So you got to meet a diverse group of people from outside just the military. And I really loved that aspect of it. I loved that we'd go out and see areas in Tokyo, Yokohama. Sometimes we'd be running through bamboo forests even. And I'm like, how did these people ever find this place? This is great. I would never be here as a tourist. That was the type of things I really loved about it that really excited me. Afterwards, you meet these people, and it's a lot of young professionals who are really smart people, and they just want to blow off some steam and have some fun on the weekends. And you did your first circle and stuff, and you're brought into circle. At least at that time at the Samurai hash, it was very non-threatening. It was very easygoing. It was just a jovial atmosphere. Everybody was just there to have fun and drink some beer afterwards. That's what I really liked about it.
How big was the pack?
Those days, the Samurai pack was a good 50 people every week, and at major events, they could get up to 100. It was a good sized pack, and got to meet a lot of friends through that.
How long did it take before you set a trail?
Probably about 10 runs in. No, I say it's earlier than that. You get named at 6 runs. So I got my name after 6 runs. Then I think it wasn't long after that before I was joining people and setting trails.
How'd you get your name? What's that story?
My actual name's kind of clean and boring. Tooth Fairy. I was the administrator at a Navy Dental Command in Yokosuka, Japan. And so people said, "Oh, so you manage all the money for a bunch of dentists, so teeth and money, Tooth Fairy." It was a pretty clean story, although I like to tell some dirty stories related to it to make it more interesting. Like it's because of the many pillows I visited or the many cavities I filled. Those are just funny jokes. It's really just a kind of a clean name having to do with my job.
It took me a while to catch up to that. The pillow, that's actually pretty good. I would tell that story. I think that's the one you need to tell. Yeah. What about your understanding of the bigger world of hashing? Did people talk about, and when did you figure out there were hashes beyond the one you were on?
Oh, I think my first year, 1993, a bunch of people were going down to Australia, or no, there was the Thunder Down Under.
That was Rotorua in New Zealand.
There was a bunch of people going to that. So that's how I figured out there's a big world beyond this. I was a young officer. I couldn't afford to go traveling and stuff like that. And I had a lot of other things going on. I was international hashing, but I didn't start travel hashing until sometime after that.
What about the running? You had been a trail runner, a competitive athlete. Where were you in the pack, and how much of 1993 that hash was it? Everybody running?
I was still a competitive runner through the mid 90s, and the Navy would send me off to run the Boston Marathon on behalf of the Navy or to run in the Armed Forces Championships, things like that. Now, it's not this way worldwide, but at Samurai, there were a lot of good, fast runners. So I was up near the lead pack. I was an FRB. I would get lost many times because I was out there out in front. But there was a lot of good, fast runners. There were also people who didn't run. And the way they did it at Samurai, they didn't have a separate walkers trail. They had a sweep, new shortcuts through the trail. So the people that were behind the sweep would be able to stay closer to the front runners.
Was there singing in the circle there?
Yes, the circles were great. A lot of humor, a lot of fun. There was singing. The songs were limited back then. It was 93. It was Japan. They sang like 2, maybe 3 songs. My singing vocabulary, my knowledge of hash songs expanded later after I left the Samurai Hash.
So you had a busy life, low budget. Did you have time to get involved in mismanagement on that hash?
No, I really enjoyed things like one of the hashers who was a Vietnam veteran started this thing called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I think it still exists to this year, and it was like an annual, turned into a pretty big event. It was real ball buster trail. I remember working with him as a co-hair on the first year we did it, and we had people running down this ravine with mud walls on both sides, and I was in the tree above dropping these smoke grenades down so that they couldn't see where they were going. He'd been a Vietnam vet and he wanted to do something in honor of the Vietnam vets. And I was honored that he asked me to do it. I was one of the Viet Cong hairs dropping smoke bombs down. And it was a blast. I like that kind of stuff. That I got involved with some of the more unusual trails that they did.
How long did you stay there? And then let's start going through the next places you went to go hashing.
I went to San Antonio after that, and I ran the San Antonio hash. Right back then, there was only one hash in San Antonio, so you didn't have many choices. And the things I remember most from that, we did a lot of fun events outside the hash, like tubing, and I would go up to Austin on the weekends for some events. The shiggy was totally different than Japanese shiggy. One time I found myself running through a waist-high swamp. Then all of a sudden, there's this snake goes floating by in front of me. I had to just freeze while he floated by. And I was like, this is definitely different than Japanese hashing. But it was also fun in its own way.
That was your second main landing spot for hashing. How different was it in terms of pack culture?
Completely different. Pack was smaller, maybe 25 people. Culture was a little different. There was more smoking, more things like that. Not as many avid runners, but still quite a few runners. So I don't want to knock it. It was a little different than Japan in that way. Obviously, the weather was very different. Winters were milder. Like I said, a lot more thorns and thickets and stuff. San Antonio, the area around there, can have some serious shiggy that you come back and you just have to pick things off your shoes and your shoelaces for 20 minutes after you're done with the run. But I had a great time there.
Let's keep marching through the places and that you went next and throw the years in there and give everybody.
Okay, so San Antonio was the mid 90s, like 95 to 97. Then I had a little break. I got married and was doing some family stuff in the late 90s. So I didn't actually hash too much in the late 90s, just once or twice a year. And then I went back to Japan. By that time, Japan had expanded more. So I was there, running there in the early 2000s through 2004. They had developed the sumo hash. So I was in the early, very beginnings of the sumo hash. And then I would make the time and effort then to take the train up and do the Tokyo Ladies hash on Wednesdays, occasionally the Tokyo hash on Mondays, which is the original hash in Japan. Right before I left, I was there, I think probably the first hash for something called the Friday Fukoff hash. And it's still alive to this day. So they had expanded considerably, and I was able to travel more. I would go to a lot of the Japan Nat hashes and things like that. I found myself traveling to more hashes all around Japan. It was the same great environment that I had remembered, and just a great social life.
Who were some of the memorable characters up through 2004 for you then in hashing?
First of all, a great guy who founded the Samurai hash, Uncle Milty. He was a great person and a friend. He passed, but I was really pretty close to Uncle Milty. The great characters, a guy named Gimpy. He had been around forever, and he's still alive. I was there for his 1000th Samurai run and things like that. So he was one of the old timers at Samurai. Ice the Light, who still runs today with Samurai. She was the longest running female. Abacus, the little old guy who would take pictures of everybody, and next week he'd give you all the pictures he took of you. And and of course, the guy who was RA when I got named, Fuking Lawyer, and he was just a great guy and became a great friend to me and later on in life. So there was a lot of great characters at Samurai Hash and throughout Japan.
So up to that point, had you guys had any run-ins with officials, anything come up in San Antonio or Japan, white powder events, any of that stuff happened?
Yes. 1995, they'd had the sarin gas attacks in Japan in the subway that killed a lot of people. Hasher thought it was a smart idea to lay trail through the subway stations about 2 weeks after it happened, and the subways were shut down, and we got, that wasn't so great. Yeah, so we did have an incident there. We had a couple more interesting incidents. A friend of mine in the early 2000s, he was laying trail, and he's shirtless running through one of the stations, laying trail, and the police stopped him and detained him, and he was a hare, and took him away. And so we just ran out of trail in the middle of the subway station. But one of my funniest stories, and this is a very Japan type story. We're running trail. We get to a metro station, and in writing on the sidewalk, it tells us which station to go to next and how much money we need. It's because we get on the train, go to another station, get off the train, and continue trail. As we get there, some old lady's down on the ground washing the chalk away because it's out in front of her store and she wants to keep it clean. So we don't know where we're going. People don't carry a lot of cell phones back in the early 2000s. It took about half an hour of us waiting around. We finally figured out where to go. We get a hold of the hare and figured out where to go and rewrote it on the ground and got on the train. And as the train's pulling away, more hashers are coming in and the old lady is down washing it away. So that's Japan.
Up to that point, how much choice did you have of where you would be going next on those postings?
Not too much choices. I ended up in San Antonio because the Navy sent me to grad school. So that was a good thing. Eventually, I ended up in DC, and by that time, after 15 years in the military, you got to do DC sometimes. So that brings me into the 2004 timeframe when I got to DC and started hashing there. But up to that time, not that a lot of choice.
Yeah. So by then, DC was many hashes a week. Which clubs did you hash with mostly?
I started with Every Day is Wednesday, which was actually held on Thursday nights. I was with them as soon as I got there. I knew some of the people there. That's another thing. The more you hash, the more people you meet and get to know. So I was on mismanagement like as soon as I got there, and I was the hash flash, taking pictures and things like that and putting them on the website. Then after about a year or two, I met my wife at that time through hashing. Then I moved over and started doing White House hash. And in the mid 2000s, my wife and I were both big into the White House hash, and I was RA and she was GM, and so we had a lot of fun with White House hash. I was mismanagement for many years with them. I was mismanagement on the DC Full Moon hash. Eventually, I was also mismanagement for the DC Red Dress run for about 5 or 6 years in a row. So I was very heavily involved with different mismanagements while I was in DC.
We could spend hours just on DC hashing of the 2000s. There's so much going on. Let's talk about how the beer was handled on Every Day is Wednesday, a unique thing.
Every Day is Wednesday, they had kegs out of the back of a van, and we had that many people that they do that. We had 100 people a week, and in the summers it could get up to 150 to 180. We would have full kegs, and White House would also have kegs. I'll tell you a White House incident called Black Monday. I was the hare that day. It was on a Monday. I was already off on trail, laying trail when all this went down. But at the beginning of the trail, we were in an area called Crystal City, which is a fairly congested area. And you have the hash cache, and right next to him, you have the brewmeister pouring beers out of the keg in the back of the van. The police came by, and they thought we were taking money to serve beer illegally, and they actually arrested the brewmeister. And his name was I forgot, no, Beer Fairy or something like that. He also had a fairy in his name anyways. And he ended up being taken to jail. And we as a hash raised money for his legal support fund and everything. It was one of those incidents that we weren't selling beer technically. We were selling registration to do the hash. I got to the beer check as the hare. And, the hare usually waits for the rest of the pack to come to the beer check and then takes off again. Never showed up, with any beer. And then so it was like, and the beer was all gone. Police confiscated the kegs. And so it's one of those very DC incidents.
Yeah, Black Monday. That's great. They had their own version. Now the Beer Mile movie trailer just dropped. There's going to be an official for the public worldwide Beer Mile, but DC had their own version of it.
Yes, we did. We had a zone in which you had to drink the beers, but it was 6 beers, not 4, and a mile on a track. And any combination way you wanted to do those 6 beers. So you could pour them into 4 larger cups. You could do whatever you want and in any way you want. So the first year I did it, I made a huge mistake. I tried to do 1 beer, 2 laps, 1 beer, 2 laps, and then 4 beers. Didn't work out because I killed the mile. I crushed the mile. I came in 6 minutes or something, but then I couldn't get the last 4 beers down because I'm like trying to drink beer. We did a variation of things. People would do 6 Irish car bombs. It was crazy. And one year I did, me and another guy named Asplunker, we set up a flip cup table, lined up our 6 beers, and then played a game of flip cup where you drink and then you flip the cup, drink the next one, flip the cup. So we did all 6 beers and then we ran the mile, but we did it as a flip cup competition. So a lot of fun was had at the DC Beer Miles for sure. And I know they still do it. I haven't done it in quite a few years. It was always a great time.
And when I did it once when you were there, we both ran at the same time. There was nobody there. It was a big track, big bleachers, big crowd, 100 people watching. It was a precursor to the Beer Mile today with a big crowd. Yeah.
Yep. So it was a blast.
You became GM, RA, hashing all continually. How did you develop your RA style? Were there A's that you think you learned from or modeled after? And what was your RAing style?
My RAing style was low key because you have different types of hashers. Some hashers love to be the center of attention. Some just like to people watch. I'm more of a people watcher. I stand by and I watch other people. And so I was low key. I would get out there. You have with White House, you got a little cheat sheet script because you got so many things that go into circle and who's got this many runs and whose anniversaries and all that stuff. So you have a little cheat sheet to go through to make sure you do the right order. And my main thing, I have, even though I'm a low key guy, I have a pretty sharp wit. So I would try to insert some wit into it if people were doing things that were dumb and stuff. But it worked out pretty well. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my experience. I enjoyed the creativity of some of the names. I love when people are getting named and you try to give them a creative name that on its face doesn't sound dirty or filthy, but it might have a dirty story underneath. You got to be creative for that. So that was, I really like being RA, but I don't usually volunteer to be an RA because I'm more of a people watcher type person and not somebody who likes to be the center of attention.
You're wearing the Trinidad Interhash shirt there. When was the first hash shirt you got? Did you get them from your first trip in Tokyo?
Yes, actually, it was one of my it wasn't one of my first hashes. My second hash ever was Samurai's 450th. I remember they had a cake for that and everything. And my first hash shirt was Samurai's 500th. I still have it somewhere. It's a big jumble of stuff. It has Mount Fuji spewing out and a bunch of little people around it. And on the back, it says 500th times. I remember didn't quite get the English right, but I still have that shirt to this day. All cotton shirts back in those days.
Along these places where you were GM, RA, or your wife was GM, how was the mismanagement meetings away from the hash as a management team? What's your memories of how those worked and what worked best?
Ours were a little more formal before the things like this, before you could do videos on Microsoft or Zoom or anything like that. It was always in-person meetings, and it was once a month. Because I'm military and my wife Slurpee is also military, it was more structured. We'd be pretty structured in what we did and have certain deliverables we needed. It wasn't formal in that we'd have people over and have beers and things like that and snacks. But at the same time, we'd have an agenda to get through with deliverables on the agenda. And so it helped mismanagement run pretty smoothly.
What about turnover in those DC hashes that you were mismanagement? What was the term for officers and how'd you handle changes?
It was an annual, everything except the red dress run, I remember was a 3-year term. And I think we did a little more than that. The normal one was a 1-year term. And then I think they had elections every year for the next set. It's hard to think back that far and remember exactly how they did it. I know how Aloha Hash does it because we were on mismanagement for them. And that's the most recent hash we moved from Hawaii this year. I can remember well how Aloha does it, but it's hard to remember back to how DC did it back in the 2000s.
Well, before we get to Hawaii hashing, let's talk about the DC red dress, because almost everybody who's hashed on the East Coast or maybe in the USA who travel hashes has made a DC red dress. It's had some years where it was gigantic and mobs of red dresses, one of the bigger ones apart from New Orleans. What's the best and worst things that happen on the red dress that you can come up with?
As with any organization, there's a lot of internal drama, and with an event that live that takes a whole year of planning, some things that you just would never think are going to come off, they end up coming off and running smoothly. One year that a lot of the centerpiece was around an outdoor pool at a hotel, even though the event is held in October. October in DC can be down in the 40s or it can be in the 80s. And so it was really a hit or miss as to the weather, but we did get good weather. They would run a lot of pre-loops leading up to the red dress. And I was on mismanagement, but I was also herring the red dress and doing it live with Asplunker and also Slurpee and Late Night Drive-Thru. So we were all doing it live. And it turns out the Thursday, the Everyday's Wednesday hash had done a pre-loop beforehand, and they had run right near our venue and used red chalk and red flour, which is what we were using for red dress. Now, it would have been okay if they'd used a different color, but they used the same colors we were using. So Asplunker and I get to the beer check, which is at a big, huge, and we're waiting forever and nobody's showing up because they all got mixed up right at the start because there was all this red chalk and red flour from 2 nights earlier that was right there at the start of the hash. So things like that happen in hashing. We just got to iron it out later.
You mentioned Slurpee, and we call people who find their significant other on the hash bottom feeders. So how's hashing and marriage work for you? What's your short answer? Hashing good for marriage, marriage good for hashing?
I don't have an opinion on that. For us, it was good. We did a lot of stuff together. And then we had times together when we didn't hash as much, like when Slurpee was going to grad school full time at night. We had 2 kids. It was hard, but at other times it's just always been a good mix for us. And so we have the same set of friends too. She doesn't have a separate set of friends than me, or if our friends are hashers, we have the same set of friends. And it's always been a positive for us.
The naming, you like the clever hash names, but there are plenty of hashes in the USA who just put it right out there with all the obscenities they can fit on a t-shirt. What do you think of that naming thing and how it's evolved since the early days?
There's actually 3 phases I see. The early days when I started hashing, it wasn't really that clever. It was actually all just clean names. Gimpy, Uncle Milty, Ice Delight. Probably the most inventive name back then was a guy who was a photographer, and his name was Snatch Shot. And I was Tooth Fairy. It was very clean, very easy names. And then later on is when I started seeing people with names that were filthy. And I'm like, that's not very creative to have that name out there. And I wouldn't want that name. And I thought the best names are names that are not filthy, but have some interesting stories behind them. I really like that kind of naming. That's the kind of name I like. There was a point in the 2000s when there was a lot of really just straight up outright dirty names. I haven't seen that as much lately. Maybe because I've been with Aloha for the last 8 years and the culture there is not to give you a filthy dirty name, but something more creative. I don't know. That's where I think it's gone back to a sort of a better level of creativity versus just pure out dirty names.
As much as you're in Hawaii with Aloha, moving out to an island, and did you start with the hash right away? And how long before you were mismanagement there?
We were mismanagement the day we arrived because we knew so many people there. By that time, we'd known a lot of DC people were there. Other people that I'd known throughout the years were there. We got there in September of 2015, and October is when new mismanagement takes over. And the haberdashers for Aloha were departing in October. And so they're like, congratulations, Slurpee, you guys are the haberdashers. We're like, great. Actually, we were haberdashers for 5 years because that's a job that's a harder job than you think. You're sitting there ordering shirts, ordering this, ordering that, showing up every week, setting up a table, selling it. And it actually takes a significant amount of work if you want to do it well and promote the hash. We did that for 5 years and then turned it over to somebody else.
Washington, D.C., although it was 20 years ago now when you started there, can be an expensive place to live, but the economy of Hawaii is quite different. What was the cost of the hash there? Was it noticeable, operating costs and running costs?
No, it wasn't too bad. We kept it to $5 a week, and even up to today, it's only 6 or 8, but it was very reasonable. We had in the early years when I was first there, we had a good deal with Gordon Biersch Brewery. We do a Wednesday happy hour for all the hashers at Gordon Biersch Brewery, and then we get discounts on kegs and stuff. So it was pretty reasonable. And then they have another hash there on Tuesdays that I would do called the Honolulu Hawaii Hash House Harriers, or the H5 for short. And that's a bring your own hash. So there's no cost to it. You show up, you do trail, and everybody brings snacks and beer. And it's really low key because of that, but it's also really fun in a different way.
How about white powder and run-ins in those 8 years in Hawaii? Anything interesting happen up there?
No, Hawaii, no white powder incidents. We had some when I was in DC. Obviously, one night at the start was in Crystal City, and somebody ran through the Pentagon parking lot with. Actually, it was dyed light green because we had to dye the powder. We had to colorize the powder in DC, but they colorized it light green, and at night it looked exactly white. And so we had 10 Pentagon police cop cars at the start, and so that one didn't work. But in Hawaii, we never really got broken up by the police or anything. It was always just very aloha atmosphere, very chill, very fun. And the thing I loved about it, especially with the aloha hash on the weekends, is a lot of times the trails would be way up in the mountains and in the hills. And once again, like I said earlier, and I can't emphasize enough, you would end up in places with these spectacular views. And you said, I would never be able to find my way here on my own, or at the base of some waterfall where everybody's jumping into the water and stuff. And you're like, I could never figure out how to get here on my own, because these were not the places the normal public tourists would ever go. And so that was really, to me, my best takeaway from the Aloha Hash. One time I was a health administrator, and I organized this conference in DC with all of the surgeons general of different countries, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, as well as all the surgeon general of the US Navy, Army, Air Force. It was a big conference about healthcare in general. As part of that, we took a bus ride up to Walter Reed and visited all the wounded at Walter Reed. On the way back to the Pentagon from Walter Reed, I'm sitting behind the British Surgeon General and the Australian Surgeon General, and I hear their conversation, and they're talking about hashing. 2 3-star generals talking about hashing. And I butted in. I'm like, excuse me, sirs, are you guys talking about hashing? And they had just been to the Inner Hash in Wales the year before. So all of a sudden, the three of us are all just talking about hashing. And suddenly I looked around, I realized the rest of the bus had gone quiet. They were all listening to our conversation saying, what the hell are these guys talking about? But it was great. It just shows you hashing's worldwide. It doesn't know any ranks. It doesn't know anything. It's everybody can do it, and everybody can have fun doing it.
Yeah, the one time I hashed in Hawaii, I was there for a SAS computer conference in Honolulu. And the first day I just went up, as soon as the stage got empty, I just walked up the stage, shut the microphone, said, "Are you?" and walked over to the side. One guy came up and I said, "We're ditching this thing and going hashing tomorrow." It's great when you can overhear a few words and you're saying, "Uh-oh, these are hazards in my presence." Yeah. You happened to be in Hawaii during COVID. How was COVID hashing there?
Hawaii was more locked down than most places. It was really strict, 14-day quarantine just to get on the island in the early stages. So hashing was out, but you basically do a virtual hash, do your own hash, upload your result. Or I don't think you had to upload. Maybe you uploaded your course, but I know you do a virtual hash. And then I think you just commented on the web or on the Facebook page, here's what we did today. And then at 7:00 in the evening, we'd have a big Zoom circle. And then there was some other guys who said, once it got a little looser, they said, we're going to start, but we're not going to call it any of the hashes because we don't want them to have to be associated, because what we're doing, it might not be on the up and up. So they would actually run a circle, but they'd run a live circle, but they'd stagger it or whatever. So there was a lot of ways around it. Everybody still wanted to hash and everybody still got out and exercised, but it was a downtime. Zoom circles are never as good as being in person with other people.
Did all the clubs survive size-wise and everything?
When we revived hashing, it took a little while, but I think today they're all back to where they were. I haven't seen too many changes.
And what are the big events you went to across all these years?
I will tell you a couple of stories about a couple of events that have good stories associated with them. Back in 2006, after the Hurricane Katrina, we went to Mardi Gras Madness, and it was the first year after Katrina, and it was called the disaster hash. We did a hash through some of the disaster areas and stuff. I found that kind of fascinating. They were trying to revive the economy. I mean, it was a very small Mardi Gras Madness hash, and it was a smaller Mardi Gras than normal. But there was a lot of press coverage there too, which was interesting. We were doing a pub crawl through the French Quarter, and we come out of a bar, and we've all had quite a few beers, And there's Anderson Cooper is there from CNN with his CNN crew. And they start interviewing us, and we're a little bit drunk. I'm like, hey, I'm the Tooth Fairy. I'm from DC, blah, blah, blah. And then this crowd of religious people come walking down the street with the big cross saying, you're all going to die. You're all going to hell. You're all sinners. And so then what do the hashers do? They start singing Jesus Saves and putting themselves up against the cross while they're singing Jesus Saves. And Anderson Cooper's filming it all for CNN going, you guys are a trip. And
I don't think that made live TV. I don't think that made
it wasn't live. It wasn't live, thank God. And in the end, the only thing that actually made it on CNN was the GM. Basically, she was still living in a FEMA trailer. But that was the only thing that actually made it to CNN. Maybe somewhere that footage still exists, but I can tell you we amused Anderson Cooper that day.
Great.
The recent highlight for me, which was going to Antarctica on the Antarctica hash. They call it the Waddle On hash. And it just, I can't describe how interesting that was, because first we fly down to Buenos Aires and we all meet up with all the other hashers and we all hash in Buenos Aires. Then we took a day where we took a ferry across to Uruguay and hashed there. And even for people like Hazakashi, that was his first time hashing in Uruguay. And you know it's unique when you're hashing someplace that Haz hasn't hashed before, even he was with us. And then we went down to Ushuaia, which is where we take the boat to Antarctica. Ushuaia is called the end of the world. And because it was the farthest south settlement in the world, we hashed there and really enjoyed it, had a great time. And then you get on the boat and you go down to Antarctica. We hashed, if you will. We hashed the best we could down there. There's very limitations on what you can do, but you can't throw flour on the ground. You have to do basically markings in the snow and things like that. But it was great. There was one point where we were out doing a mountaineering trip and we didn't have good weather, and I'm getting my head blown off, and you don't have much visibility, and you're on a rope team. And all of a sudden I look down and there's a YBF written in the snow by one of the other hashers up ahead, because we had 85 out of the 110 people on the ship were hashers. And it was awesome being able to hold a circle on the front of the ship while you're floating through these channels in Antarctica. It was spectacular scenery and penguins floating by on icebergs and humpback whales jumping in the water next to the boat. And it was just a unique experience. And I got to give a shout out to Occupied and Liquor Up for organizing that. It was hard to organize, but it was a once in a lifetime trip for us, and I loved it.
What's happened with your life now? All this big changes, retirement. You're now in the sunshine state of Florida. What's going on with you?
We retired. My wife still works, so we have a townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia. We split our time between Virginia and Florida. Florida, we bought a house many years ago. We had tenants living in it, and now they're out, and we're renovating that house. So we're spending more time in Alexandria, but we're going between here and Florida to oversee the renovations. And then we're going to eventually settle on that house in Florida once it's all done and renovated and we're ready to move in.
What town is
that? Oh, St. Petersburg. We've already acquainted ourselves with some of the hashers there. They have the St. Petersburg hash. They have a Taco Tuesday hash. And then across the bay in Tampa is Jolly Roger hash. I know Jolly Roger has an annual cruise that Slurpee and I want to get out on maybe next year, not 2024, but maybe 2025. I'm looking forward to it. I know a lot of people down there. Of course, when you've been hashing a long time, you end up knowing a lot of people everywhere. They seem to be a really great group from what I've done with them. And when we're here in DC, in Virginia area, we hash with Mount Vernon, which is another great group. We're still chugging on and still having fun.
Do you expect once you move there permanently, get back into mismanagement? Some of those hashes, Jolly Roger, they're well run, long established. Do you think you'll get called to duty on those hashes there?
It's very possible. It's very possible. Right now, since we're not there full time, we're not in a position to do that since we're going back and forth. But once the renovations are done and we're settled in, yeah, we probably could end up on mismanagement pretty easily. A lot of our friends who I used to be on mismanagement with in DC are on mismanagement down there now. So it just seems to be, if you have experience, it's good. You can add something to the hash and contribute to it.
The fact is, you meet people that are at the end of their hashing career when you're just starting, and you pass over, and now there's new hashers that are meeting you that you've been doing this for 3 years. Does anybody comes to mind that you have warm memories of that has passed on, isn't with us anymore?
Oh, yes, a number of people. But like I said, to me, the founder of my first hash, Uncle Milty, he passed several years back, and we miss him. And when I was here in DC, I was very close friends with Hasher Humper and Spinal Tap, and they both passed on. I was actually in Cozumel when Hasher Humper passed. I was with them in Cozumel, and Suzanne had set up all these plans for us in Cozumel. And then she had a tragic diving accident. And then several years later, like I said, a spinal tap also passed. So you have good memories of these people, and you keep those memories, and you keep the good times that you had in your head and in your heart. And you don't forget it. You try to pass on to others how good they were to you. You pass that on to the younger generation when you find somebody that you think is a great person and try to help them out. I will tell you, yeah, Pastor Humper and spinal tap. I had a personal incident that I really needed to get to Japan in a hurry in 2009 because of some stuff that was going on in my life. But I was also financially strapped at the time. And they said, don't worry, we're frequent travelers. We're going to give you enough miles for you to get there and back. And so, yeah, that's the type of people they were. They're just like, hey, we're going to help you out. You're a fellow friend in need and a hasher in need, and we'll take care of you. So that's the thing. You miss people like that, but you try to, like I said, you try to pass on their legacy to others.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking about them. I think everybody hears their name smiles when they think back on those two and everybody else you talked about too. You're splitting time, Alexandria, Florida. Where's all your hash gear? Have you jettisoned it, or have you been always just taking it all in? And what happens to all your memorabilia?
There's stuff that's sentimental to me, like my first hash shirt and some of the very early hash shirts that I've kept. There's other ones, and then I take about half the shirts and have them down in Florida and half here in Virginia, half my gear. And then there's other things that I said, this stuff's really not appropriate to give away to Goodwill. Hash mugs. So I've got this gigantic box in my basement, and I've gathered it up now that we're consolidated here. And I'm just going to bring it to an event and just give it away to people who want it, see who wants it and give it away. I thought about doing also, I have many running shirts also. There's some people that do quilts and stuff out of them, and I've seen those. You can do quilts out of the old hash shirts and stuff. So that's another option. There's many things you can do with it, but you can't keep it forever, especially some of the old cotton shirts from the 2000s and stuff. I'm like, I don't run with cotton shirts much anymore. I might wear them around the house, but that's about it.
You're positive. You have a good outlook on everything, but are there things about the hash that you have strong preferences for? You've been on almost all co-ed hashes. There's all men's hashes, all women's hashes. There's hashes with different traditions. Is there anything that set you back that said, wow, that one probably isn't for me, or that one really aligns with me?
I don't like to criticize too much. I went to one hash, and I'm not going to name it, but it's down south somewhere. And I go out, and there's 35 people in the pack, 3 runners, including the hair, and 30 people smoking and not very fit. And I'm like, yeah, they're still good people, still a good time at Circle, but it doesn't make the whole experience for me. The hashing is about 3 things. It's about running and having a good time with your friends and drinking some beers and singing songs. Maybe it's because I was a runner, and maybe it's because I started with a Samurai hash. That's a running hash. Another time I was with another hash down south, and they invited me out on a trip, and we were tubing down a river. And this is years ago, and they all were smoking pot and passing it around. And I'm like, no, I'm in the military. I don't do that kind of stuff. And I thought, this is very different than other hashes. But to each their own. I always say, you do what you want to do. But sometimes it's just, yeah, some things are a little over the top, and I'm not an over the top type of person. So I'm more relaxed, more controlled. Sometimes if I drink a little too much, I can be over the top. But for the most part, if I stick to just beer, I'm pretty good.
You have been through these, let's say 90s, zeros, ones, twos, in your 4th decade across these years of hashing. And it seems like you could go back to the first Samurai hash and you'd fit right in and remember saying, what do you think hashing is going to be like when we're all gone 40, 50 years? Would people recognize it? Do you think people would recognize hashing today when the hash gets way in the future? You think it'll change? It's been pretty consistent over these many decades what hashing is. What do you think?
I haven't seen many changes, and it's hard to say, to generalize like that, because there is a lot of variation from hash to hash. Just within the DC area, you take a hash like Great Falls. I've been very welcome there a number of times, where the focus isn't as much on Circle, and you get a name after 100 hashes, and they all bring potluck meals. It's just different atmosphere than, say, the Everyday's Wednesday hash, which is a bunch of young 20-somethings that are out there to drink a lot of beer and do more crazy stuff. So, and everything in between. So I appreciate all the different variation, and I think that variation will continue. I think rather than hashing as general, in general sense changing. I think there might be even more variation in the future. But
COVID took its toll. A lot of clubs dropped, new clubs formed, and that's the nature of the hashing universe over all these years.
the basics of hashing, the things that I like about hashing, I like that generally people are athletic. Generally, they're professionals. There are a wide group of people, that lawyers, business people, military, whatever. It's a diverse group. If you go overseas, you're gonna find a diverse group, and it's a group of people who are not really thin-skinned. If you're a really thin-skinned person, you might leave after your first hash. But it's people who it's my type of people, and that hasn't changed over the years.
When's the next hash? You're busy with house renovations, everything. Do you have any hash travel planned?
Yeah, in fact, I was just working on it yesterday. In March, Sophie and I were going from here, going to stop over in Hawaii for a few days, see old friends, and then off to New Zealand for the interhash. And I was just working on all our New Zealand plans because we've got, in addition to the hashing days, we've got 5 days on each side of that to do other things. There's a couple of prelubes. There's like a biking prelude, which looks interesting. Of course, the red dress run, and then the interhash itself. I love those interhashes. I love Inter-America's hashes and interhashes because it gives me a chance to run into a lot of old friends and see people that I haven't seen in a long time. I remember an example of an Inter-America's hash where I got to know you a little better was Puerto Vallarta, 2007. And I had a day left over at the end of the hash, and you're like, oh, I got this nice villa overlooking Puerto Vallarta. Why don't you come up and visit? And we went up, Circuit, I went up, and it was just beautiful, the place that you had up there that you rented. And so that's the kind of stuff I love to travel hashes. I can't do them I can't do them constantly. I'm not a constant traveler like some of these hashers, but the last big one we did was Antarctica 20, and then we're definitely going to New Zealand.
Well, that's good. Any other thing you wanted to get in that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I love the way hashing is everywhere. It's embedded everywhere. I was in Japan and went to this place called Diego Garcia. It's a little island 1,000 miles south of the tip of India. When I finally arrived there, you have to go through Singapore, stay overnight in Singapore, then you get to Diego Garcia. When I got there, I get to the little airport, and I'm like, is there a restroom around ahead? I need to go. They're like, yeah, but it's outside restroom. So I go outside. It's a concrete restroom. On the side of the concrete wall, there's a true trail arrow. So I'm like, a hash just came through here recently. I love it. I'm 1,000 miles south of the tip of India, middle of the Indian Ocean, and there's a hash here. I love that you can go somewhere when you're visiting and get in with the locals right away. You're not doing the tourist thing. You get to know the locals. And I'll give you a great example of the locals will reach out and embrace you and do great things. A couple of times I was in Vegas, and they were amazing. The first time I was there to do hash, and I did a hash in 2006, and I was looking up on back then we had Yahoo groups, so I'm looking up on the Yahoo group, and they said they have a full moon hash once a month, and I'm going to be there during the full moon. So I reach out, I'm like, hey, there's 4 of us coming from DC to Vegas. Are you guys holding a full moon? And they go, oh, we stopped doing that 6 months ago, but since there's 4 of you coming, we're going to hold one. So they held a hash, and a whole bunch of people showed up just because we were coming there. And the next time I was there, I wanted to do the hash. It was before Uber. So I'm like, how do I get a taxi to the hash? So I wrote onto the page, hey, what's the easiest way to get a taxi out to the hash? They go, oh, no, we got a person. If there's any hashers, we got a person that goes through Las Vegas Strip every week, picks up all the hashers, bring them to the hash, and then drops them back off on the Vegas Strip afterwards. It's like a shuttle service to the hash from the Vegas Strip. I'm like, this is incredible. And that's what I love about traveling and meeting people when you travel with the hash, because the locals will take you right in. You get to see things with the locals that you never get to see on your own as a tourist. And that just makes it.
Let's see, the hares, the part of the mismanagement for Puerto Vallarta included Easy Over. And she had a sister, I think, getting married in Las Vegas. So she said, I'm coming over. So a whole bunch of people from Seattle, Toronto, we said, let's all meet in Las Vegas because they're coming into town. So we'll see these hashers, just a chance to see them in America. So we went there. Their thing, like, we don't have a hash this weekend, but we'll sell it. They set a pub crawl on Friday night through the Strip and everywhere. And it ended up that there was a guy from Toronto and a girl from Seattle that met that weekend. They ended up getting married. Almost everybody that was in that Las Vegas weekend then was out in Seattle for their wedding a couple of years later. Yeah, I have the same kind of fond memories of Las Vegas. They were just same thing. I remember we had a pub crawl, and I remember running around, and somebody said, we got y'all. We'll split you into cars, and they know all the back roads and everything. That's a great place. Washington, D.C. is like that to people because there's so many hashers there.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you remember the transition from paper to the early internet to Facebook and how that affected hashing and communication? Do you think about that at all?
I do. I was thinking about that the other day. I thought when I moved from Japan to San Antonio in 95, how did I ever find my way to the hash? I don't know. Somebody must have told me about it and given me a phone number of somebody else to call. You found your way to the hashes, but I can't physically remember how I did it. I mean, once you could get onto Google groups or Yahoo groups or things like that, it was a little easier. And then you went to social media later. But in those early days, I don't remember. I don't think San Antonio had a phone number. And I don't know if you weren't at the hash, you didn't know where next week's hash was going to be, but you could call somebody that was there. And that's how you'd find out where next week's hash was going to be. It's hard to remember how I found my way to them, but you found your way back then. You found a way to do it. It's just harder to remember how you found your way.
You've been plenty of places around the world, from Diego Garcia, you're getting to New Zealand, Antarctica, and all over South America on the way to Antarctica. Are there any other places that you want to go that hashing may take you that you haven't been?
Oceania, which I'm going to New Zealand, so that's going to be a new one for me. I also want to hash in Australia, and I have hashed a number of times in Europe, but I want to hash more there. I spent a lot of my time out in Asia with the military, but not a lot of time in Europe. I went to Brussels 2014, which was awesome, and I've done other interesting things. Like we were in Sweden for a wedding, and we landed, and the day we landed, there was a hash, which was the Stockholm 666 hash, 6K, 6 different shot or beer checks. And then afterwards, they all ended at a lake. It was still daylight at midnight. We went skinny dipping and all this stuff. That's my first night in Sweden. But anyways, I want to do more European hashing. I haven't done enough of it. I haven't hashed in England either, which is one of the cradles of hashing as well. So I want to do that. So there's plenty that I still want to do and want to get to. And I want to hash on every continent too. So I also still want to get Africa someday, like a Pan-African hash. That and Australia are the two I haven't done yet, continent-wise.
Are you ever going to run another beer mile on that?
My knees are not so good these days for running fast. It would have to be a slow beer mile, but I could probably still do it. In Hawaii, we also did something called the 6-pack 10K, which was another good event around Diamond Head. It was a 10K, and you'd have a beer stop at every mile. So you did 6 beers and a 10K. Didn't get you as messed up as the beer mile, but Slurpee, my wife, she stopped drinking a few years back, so she did it with 6 Mountain Dews, and she couldn't sleep for 3 days afterwards. So she learned after that to do it with something other than Mountain Dew. It was really, that wasn't a good idea.
The Hogtown anniversary, we had a whole bunch of norovirus, H2O, my wife. She got an upset stomach. I think we have the good blood type that keeps the symptoms to a minimum, but boy, we almost killed the whole hash. In Niagara Falls, there were more people from Pittsburgh than Toronto there, because we lost our hotel that we usually do the Hogtown anniversary, and they knocked it down a couple of years ago. But yeah, Malort Mile's a bad idea. It's just
Malort Mile. Oh my God. I'll tell you one more. We were on a White House camping trip one year, and we were, of course, mismanagement. That's another huge event to organize because they get about 180 campers. And it's all self-sustaining. There's no electricity there. You got to bring in power generators and everything and feed 180 people. But the great thing is we were out scouting for the Friday night trail, and we were scouting on Friday afternoon. We're up in the Shenandoah area. This is where it takes place. The camp trip is on the Shenandoah River, and we're running through some back farm countries, and these 2 pit bulls come running at us, and I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna die. But they were both friendly, and they started just following us on trail. Eventually, one of the pit bulls turned back. The other one followed us all the way back to the campground, and she was just the sweetest thing. She had no identification, no chip, but she had ticks all over her. And my wife, we had another pet, my dog, and my wife happened to have I forgot what it's called, that it just squirt on the dog and all the ticks fall off. So she slept in our tent that night, and just was the sweetest dog. And so we brought her home. She had Lyme disease. She had all kinds of things wrong with her. We spent about $2,000 to get her back to health. We said to the doctor, should we bring her back and knock on some of these farms and see if somebody owns her? He said, no, don't bring her back. She was in very bad health. And she had never been inside a house before either. When we brought her inside her house, she was terrified. But the great thing is, she became our dog for many years afterwards. Her name was Shannon, named after the Shenandoah. She was crazy fun. And we found her while scouting trail up in the Shenandoah, near the Shenandoah River up in the Appalachian Mountains. So
Wow, that's one of the best hashing stories I've ever heard. That's
Yep.
great.
Yep.
You're not the only tooth fairy. Sometimes when we're talking about you, someone will mix up. It's a different tooth fairy. You
yes,
know the other tooth fairies?
I've known two of them, and I knew of the third one. So here's the story. When I first moved to DC, I met the tooth fairy from Savannah, and Ted was his real name. And we ran into each other at a lot of camping trips and stuff. And we started hashing around the same time. I started in 93 in Japan, and he started in 94 in Korea. So we both started in Asia within a year of each other. So people would mix us up a lot. And then we were going to Puerto Vallarta in 2007. And another tooth fairy was registered to come, and he was from El Paso, and he was a border agent. Shortly before that, unfortunately, he was in a helicopter crash and died. Tooth fairy Ted from Savannah and me, we did a missing man down where you put your arm out like this and there's nobody in between us. So we did a missing man down for him because he passed away about 2 months before Interhash. And then we said, we'll do that again in 2009 out in Colorado at the Interhash. Then Ted I think he got cancer and he died about 2 months before the Colorado Interhash. So I remember I did a double missing man down with nobody on either side of me. And that was very sad that we lost both of the other tooth fairies. But there is a fourth one in Kansas City. I'd heard about him for many years, and I finally got to meet him in person and hang out with him in Fiji at the Interhash because he made it to Interhash in Fiji. So there's the Kansas City tooth fairy, and there's me, and then there's the other two tooth fairies that have passed away. So it is a name that it's not the most common name, but it's also not the least common. So there are a number of tooth fairies, and the name lives on in memory of the other two. So
yeah, I went on one of the Babes cruise out of New Orleans with him. He's a great guy, the Savannah Tooth Fairy. Yeah, he was a great guy. He almost got kicked off the boat, though.
yeah, he was a great guy until he had. Don't put this in. Don't put that in.
I'll say it. He was a great guy until he drank a lot. No, he was still a great guy, but he liked pushing the envelope with the public and everybody else. I had to intervene and talk calmly to some of the way I remember it, talk to some of the staff, and he went to dinner in his red dress, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I believe that. Now that you mentioned Babes Hash Cruise, I've got to tell you a Babes Hash Cruise story because it's awesome. The Babes Hash Cruise, 2011, we were all over the Caribbean. We went to St. Martin. And so about half the people said, we're just going to go to the nudie beach on St. Martin. And the other half said, we're going to do a hash that's going to end at the nudie beach. Yeah, St. Martin's divided into two different countries.
The Dutch and France?
And France, yeah. The nudist beach is on the French side, but we started on the Dutch side and went over the top and down. That was the plan. It went haywire. So we got lost basically in the woods. The hares are up in the lead, and they're laying it with toilet paper through the woods because it's biodegradable and flour. And the rest of the pack is going down through these woods, and they just got wildly lost, like completely lost. And everybody starts scattering out in the mountains. And I was literally 3 hours in that I ran out of water, and everybody was running out of water, and it was hot, and we're in these woods, really thick. I think about 4 hours in, I get to a tree, and there's the last roll of toilet paper stuck on a branch because they've run out of toilet paper, and there's blood on the roll. That was really bad. We eventually, at least my group, we were all split up, and my group got into this impenetrable thicket that we couldn't go on any further, and we just started yelling for help. We're yelling at the top of our lungs for help. We backtracked, and then I heard Slurpee, because I had been separated from her. I heard her yelling, I found something, and she found a stream bed, and we followed the stream bed down under the thickets, and eventually came out to a trail. And as we're going down the trail, all these officials are coming up the trail to rescue us because the music and Darcy Blows were both on the trail, and Dar was on the trail, music was not. And he called the officials, and they actually had to do rescue operations up to bring people down. And the whole nudist beach thing went out the door. We got back to the ship 10 minutes before departure. All the other hashers that hadn't gone on trail were like hugging us and literally crying. They were crying because they thought we were going to miss the ship's movement. It was insane. And then afterwards, late night drive-through had actually had, and this is in 2011, a GPS watch on, and she had the whole trail. We had come close to the road a number of times and never known it. And so we made up a t-shirt, I Survived Babes Hash Cruise, with the entire trail on the shirt and everything. It was really funny, but interesting story.
I've heard about that lost trail from, I don't know who told me their version of the story too.
Yep.
Who do you remember? Who were some of the people that were lost out there with you?
Darcy Blows was up there. There was some
Oh, that's who told me about that trail.
Yeah, she was up there. A couple of our DC friends were out there. Like late night drive through was on trail, but Ask Flunker went straight to the nudist beach. There was, I forgot his name, some older guy from London or Wales or something. Wish I could remember his name, but he was way in the back, but a couple people stayed in the back to help him down. And of course there was Babe and there was the Hares, and it's hard to remember who exactly was there, but it was a good time.
You're in a position to answer this question. I often ask people to wrap this up. Is the RA always right?
The RA is always right, especially you.
To close the circle, here's the Hash Anthem sung by Mother Hash.
Swing.